Holding. Hey, good evening and welcome again, everyone. My name is Noel Nix. I am the Director of Community Initiatives in Mayor Carter's office. When we are just so excited that you joined us tonight for our presentation and discussion regarding the city's proposal to implement administrative citations. So tonight we'll go through some introductions just to get a sense of who is on the call. We'll cover the objective, opportunities, and benefits of administrative citations and go into some specific details and examples of how and where the city would be looking to use this tool. We will talk about what it looks like to change the charter to allow for ordinance changes to implement administrative citations. And then we'll talk a little bit through the process that the city would propose to use as part of the enforcement of administrative citations. We'll go through some frequently asked questions that we've heard over the past few weeks, and then open it up for any additional general questions, and then we'll close by covering next steps in the process. So before we really dig in here, what I'd like to do is just do a roll call here and again get a sense of who is on the call with us. So I will call on you, and if you could just share your name, your organizational affiliation if you have one, and what neighborhood you live or work in St. Paul. So let's start with Grace.
Oh, hello. Thank you, Noel. Grace Schmidt. I belong to my family organization. How's that? I live in the Battle Creek area in Ward 7.
Next, let's go to Ann.
Ann Olson. Is that, I don't know if there are a couple of Anns.
Yes, go ahead.
Hello. My name is Ann Olson. I'm executive director of a group called Animal Folks, and we deal with animal cruelty issues as well as animal welfare issues. And I live in the Crocus Hill area.
Great. Lauren?
Yep, so my name is Lauren Godfrey Singh. I'm representing Chicken Run Rescue, and we work with St. Paul Animal Control. So we kind of, I guess you could say we work all over the area.
Great. Bruce?
I'm Bruce Clark. I live on the west side. I'm not affiliated with any organization or its point of view right now.
Matt?
Matt Freeman. I live on the west side and I work in Frogtown, and I am a member of the St. Paul Charter Commission.
Peng?
Hi, I'm Pang Bang, and I have a business, a home care agency on the east side of St. Paul in the Dayton's Bluff area. I am also on the LSEC committee, and then I am also a member of the Minnesota First Provider Alliance.
Great, thank you. Taylor?
Hi, my name is Taylor Chevy, and I use she, her, they, them pronouns. And I'm part of SICTOOL, the Center of Workers United in Struggle. We're a multiracial workers center across the Twin Cities. So do work all across St. Paul, in downtown as well. And I do not live in St. Paul. Glad to be here, though.
Thank you. Tanya?
Thank you, Noel. Tanya Bauer. I work for the St. Paul Port Authority. I'm also the chair of the City of St. Paul Business Review Council and have the honor of serving on the boards of the East Side Area Business Association and Bay Area Chamber. Thank you for letting me join tonight.
Great, thank you for being here. Vicki Garretts?
Hi, Vicki Garretts. I don't live in St. Paul either, but I provide support to the Minnesota First Provider Alliance that Pang Bang mentioned. Personal care tenant agencies, many of whom are in St. Paul. Thank you.
Next, let's go to the person calling in from 238-4021. Can you introduce yourself? Again, 238-4021. Let's try the person. Oh, go ahead.
This is Sean. *6 to mute or unmute yourself if you're dialing in.
Oh, thanks, Sean. Let's go to the person at 646-3473.
That's Jane McClure from The Villager, and I will mute myself again. I'm both looking at the screen and calling in because I have 2 meetings tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. And then I thought I saw one other person maybe join us. Is there anyone else who is a guest, a non-city staff on the call who hasn't had an opportunity to introduce themselves? All right, and then before we begin, I see a few folks who have joined us for previous meetings. You're going to hear a lot of the same information, but you know, you'll see that we'll try to cover some of the responses to some of the questions that you may have posed at previous sessions. But for the benefit of those who are hearing this information for the first time, we'll walk through the previous presentation. And so I will turn it over to Director Ricardo Cervantes.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Noel. And again, echoing Noel's gratitude. Thanks for joining us tonight on this issue. And we're looking forward to having a good conversation, providing you some information, but most importantly is getting some feedback as we go forward. So as we look at the objective is at the very highest level within the city, we have certain ordinances within the city that can only be enforced with criminal citations effectively. The city has other ordinances that lack effective tools to gain compliance. And the city has developed new ordinances that are going to require effective tools in order to ensure compliance with those requirements. You know, what we expect to achieve with the civil enforcement tool is an effective way of gaining compliance and avoiding any unintended consequences. This project does align with the city's goals and the mayor's pillars and values: community first public safety, economic justice, equity, and innovations. And you may be familiar with the mayoral initiatives regarding some of the fine and fee work that he's done. Probably most notable is the overdue library fees and waiving towing and storage charges. I should say that this tool is not a new tool. It's been around for quite a while. It was first adopted in Minnesota in the mid-90s and is used by at least 10 other cities within Minnesota, including Bloomington, Duluth, St. Cloud, just to name a few. Next slide, please. So my experience in working with an administrative citation program, you know, stems from some of my work in this area in Minneapolis. I'm very familiar with the program they have in Minneapolis, as well as many of the other cities that, you know, are partners around regulations. The Department of Safety and Inspections has a variety of different areas in which we are a regulatory agency. We deal with zoning, construction, fire safety, code compliance. Those are the livability standards for the city. And then animal control and business licensing. And so in my prior experience, as well as working with other cities, this tool has been effective in many of those different areas. This tool also is going to be focused on compliance. And I think it's really important that you understand that in order for us to gain compliance, we need to really educate those who, those who fall under these rules. And we always begin the process with that education. This also is a timely system, which allows for the city to manage, as opposed to relying on Ramsey County, which can sometimes be overwhelmed with activity. And then this also is the right size. So as we move forward in the various processes in which our city attorney will explain, there will be opportunities for us to right size the penalties so that they're not overburdening, and then again will not create any negative impacts which are not part of the compliance effort. It also allows for us to consider increasing penalties for those that are non-compliant, choosing not to comply. And so again, the right size is regarding, one is the severity of the violation, as well as the frequency, and then the motive. It can all be part of the consideration in setting the fees. This would be a city managed system, which would allow for us to control the schedule and the timeliness. We believe that moving through an enforcement system allows for both clarity and expediency for those who may be receiving an administrative citation, but it also allows for us to bring that condition into compliance, which may be impacting others in our community. So we want to be as timely as possible. It's a little less formal than a criminal court. We maintain the importance of our city ordinances and standards, which can sometimes get lost when a court is dealing with more serious and severe criminal cases. And so the city will be able to maintain the standards by which are set in our city ordinances and legislative code. And then lastly, you heard me say this, and I'll say it again, is that in the city of St. Paul, we do use criminal citations. With those criminal citations, they do bring additional consequences to those who may have a criminal record. It will impact, their ability to get housing, sometimes impact their ability to get a job. It may impact their profession if they need certifications. And so what we're looking to do is really create a tool that will allow for us to gain compliance without overreacting to what those non-compliance issues are, right sizing it, gaining compliance, and then moving forward. Next slide, please. So the benefits, again, are really to reduce any unintended consequences, in large part as part of the criminal process that we have in the city. And then, again, create an effective tool to gain compliance. We have many ordinances in the city that do not have the tools that are effective, that allow for us to move forward in gaining compliance. And then we have new ordinances as well that are going to need these tools. And then also that it'll be city managed. We hope to gain some efficiencies, some timeliness, and better outcomes as a result of using this tool. Next slide, please. So each of the departments have been working on putting together recommendations on where we would begin to focus on using administrative citations. And like I said, we're a broad organization in DSI. Some of those areas would be in our animal control division, and we'd use those for unlicensed animals, dog bites, dogs at large, those type of violations. In our construction trades area, we would also be looking at using this tool where we have work without the proper permits. Currently, there are some tools that are in this realm. Some of those tools can be a little more severe than getting people to understand that they need to get those permits in advance. So this might better right size what those penalties are. Working without competency cards, one of the requirements we have in the city is folks that enter into doing any trade work that have anything to do with systems that could be put at risk, electrical, plumbing, mechanical, gas. We want to make sure that those folks have the knowledge and they've gone through accredited studies in order for them to do that work. And so working without a competency card means that work may be deficient and be putting people at risk. Any open permits, there's requirements to close permits in our city. And that's one of the issues that we struggle with, is to ensure that after permits have been pulled, plans have been reviewed, work has been done, that we close that loop and make sure the permit has been inspected, making sure that they use the proper materials, methodology, and making sure that it's safe. And so that would allow for us to use this tool for some of those cases. Safety violations when work isn't done correctly, and then failure to finalize those permits. And then lastly, we've been looking at using this tool in our zoning division, which is an area we don't have tools specifically for effective compliance with site plans, unpermitted signs, which come up often around events, new openings and things like that, unapproved land uses, where clearly somebody is using a piece of property that is not zoned for that use within a particular area of the city. Usually that causes stress for surrounding properties and the community at large. And then lighting violations, where they may be the lights may be too bright, shining on neighboring properties or residents, in which case usually a gentle nudge will get people to kind of fall into compliance. And generally speaking, we're talking about a very small segment of folks in our city. I think generally speaking, most folks are compliant. And so we're talking about that 5% of individuals that do not comply. And we'll walk through what that process will look like generally for DSI and the other divisions. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Christian Butler, who's the Deputy Director for our HERO department.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Director Cervantes. Yes, my name is Christian Butler. I am the Deputy Director of Human Rights and Labor Standards for the St. Paul Department of Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity, better known as HERO. And so tonight I just wanted to walk through with you all how HERO would use the administrative citations in our enforcement efforts. So the primary reason why we are engaged with this charter amendment project, actually two primary reasons. One, HERO is extremely supportive of the equitable solutions to gain compliance without using the criminal justice system, like Director Cervantes spoke a lot about. Second, HERO, we have a few ordinances where the administrative citations would be implicated with respect to our enforcement. Namely, they would be the Earned Sick and Safe Time Ordinance, the Minimum Wage Ordinance, and the Ban on Conversion Therapy Ordinance. And most businesses that we work with respect to the Earned Sick and Safe Time and minimum wage ordinances, we have found them to be pretty honest employers who are really doing their best to comply and may just not know that something they're doing or should be doing is making them be in violation. But once we make contact with them, most of the time we find that they are gaining compliance through what we refer to as a predetermination settlement agreement and a negotiation process. And like Director Cervantes was saying, the 5%, the few bad actors out there who would flagrantly violate the ordinances, We just need to make sure that we have a way of handling those minimal situations. And unfortunately, as the ordinance is currently constructed, they're just offering a patchwork to enforcement. And by going through this charter amendment project, the new administrative structure would offer a streamlined and clear path to enforce our earned sick and save time minimum wage and conversion therapy ban ordinances, and it will make it uniform across the city for all of our residents. I want to note that here we are charged with more than just labor standards enforcement. We also represent the City of St. Paul as its lead agency on the Central CERT Board, and that board works to provide resources to local small businesses in public contracting. We at HERO, we make considerable resources available to certified businesses through contracts with local partners on business support services. We also enforce the vendor outreach program for the city, which deals with requirements on public contracts. And through that enforcement, we help open the doors for the certified small businesses in the public sector contracting. So again, this proposed charter change, we look at it as another tool in our toolbox with respect to enforcing, specifically the labor standards ordinances and the conversion therapy ban ordinance. Again, against those very few bad actors, the 5% of people out there, where we would actually need this tool to make sure that they are abiding by the law. And by doing this, this will level the playing field for all of our small businesses and who do work every day to play by our rules and who do work to comply with the local ordinances. And it would help to make St. Paul a better community that would work for all of us. And so that's why HERO would definitely, that's why we are a part of this administrative citation process. Thank you very much. Now I would turn it over to Director Carter Ramos of the Office of Financial Empowerment.
Thank you, Christian. Really appreciate it. Again, my name is Munir. I'm the Director of the Office of Financial Empowerment. And where this would apply in our work and what you see I put in the chat is really connected to relocation assistance. So as a part of the tenant protection ordinance that was passed recently, the city would request relocation assistance paid to a renter from a property owner or manager if the renter was displaced as a result of no fault of their own for several reasons. And I'll mention what some of those reasons are in a second, but the purpose of the relocation assistance is to prevent housing displacement and to effectively support renters in a move if they are displaced. So what is the amount of the relocation assistance? This definition will sound wonky, but the links lead you to the exact amounts and that sort of thing, which sort of change each year. But the relocation assistance is a payment in an amount equal to 3 times the rental housing affordability limit at 60% of the area median income for the Twin Cities metro area. So for advance notice of sale, what would that actually mean? It'd be once a property sells, there's a 90-day protection window given to a renter. And if within those 90 days, the property owner requires the renter to move, increases the rent, or rescreens, an existing renter, and it results in displacement, then the property owner would be required to pay relocation assistance. The second provision is just cause, and there's a number of just causes listed, but 2 of them in particular apply to relocation assistance. One would be under rehab and renovation. So this would be where the property owner seeks to rehab or renovate, a unit that will render that unit uninhabitable for the duration of the work. Then relocation assistance, would be required. And then the other instance is when the property owner is complying with a government agency's order to vacate, abate, or any other order that requires the renter to move out as a result of the violation of a St. Paul City Code or other provision. So then relocation assistance would be required. So again, the purpose of relocation assistance is to prevent housing displacement and to effectively support renters in a move if these different possibilities came up in the term of their tenancy with the property owner. So with that said, I will kick it over to our partners over in the water department.
Myself, thanks guys. I had to unmute myself. Brent Marsalik, St. Paul Regional Water Services, here to talk to you about certain code violations within the water system. And I'd like to bring up the idea of illegal use of hydrants, which is one of our legislative code sections, 90.08, that could result in fines that could very well use this administration citation process to take care of anyone who does violate this legislative code. So what this code does is, well, St. Paul Regional Water Services, we have a process that allows contractors to apply for access to hydrants, which includes the required use of a meter and a backflow apparatus, which we provide to them. This makes the use of a hydrant much safer, easier on the system. Most of the contractors, like it's been said before, most of the people who do this know and follow the rules, but violations do occur. And, you know, what happens when these violations occur can be nothing to pretty major. Beyond just the theft of water, beyond the opening of the hydrant without the required backflow prevention, that all has the potential to create big fluctuations in the pressure in our public water mains. And that can cause water main breaks, which are very costly to the utility. But unfortunately, many of the main breaks caused by such actions are more likely to occur to the type of older infrastructure that quite often serves the older neighborhoods and older businesses in our city. Also, these acts could possibly damage the hydrant without our knowledge, which could make the hydrant insufficient for its intended use, which is for fire suppression during an emergency. I'd like to bring up two other codes, one of them performing plumbing services without a permit. Just as Ricardo had mentioned earlier, we need to ensure that plumbing work is done by qualified professionals in order to protect the water system and the residents of the city. If major plumbing work is done without permits and inspections, there's no way to be certain that the work meets plumbing code. And as with the city's public mains, it is really more important for many of the older homes in St. Paul as opposed to the newer homes. Work done without permits and inspections could even possibly lower the value of the homes due to shoddy workmanship. As we all know, most every home sale these days is contingent on a home inspection, which could discover these issues and most likely lower the value of the home. Also, as it relates to the next section, 92.13, which is plumber not to shut or off or turn on water in the street. Quite often, major plumbing work, especially work in and around the meter setting, often needs the water to be turned off in the street. Plumbers turning the water on and off in the street are generally doing so in order to perform plumbing work without a permit. It's our way of stopping people to do the wrong kind of work inside residents' homes, and we need to protect them and their piping within their home. So I guess within these three areas, we're looking to use this administration citations process moving forward. Again, violations of these sections are rare, but they do generally involve activity performed by businesses or persons who are aware that these activities are violations of these codes, but deliberately ignore them for their own convenience. Fines are needed for those violators, but we believe this tool will be able to help with the goal of full compliance through administration citations instead of applying the criminal citation process. And next up, I believe we have someone for the City Attorney's Office, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Brent. I am Rachel Tierney, Deputy City Attorney for the City of St. Paul. Before I jump into what the charter change is going to do, I'm going to answer one of our most frequently asked questions, which is what is an administrative citation? An administrative citation, you can think of that as a speeding ticket. It is a citation that you are issued for which there is never jail time. There's no criminal offense attached. by and large a fine. Everything that we're talking about today would be fine only penalties. So now we'll get into what the charter change would. Oh, there's one more kind of table I'd like to set, which is the City of St. Paul has 3 different kinds of ordinances. The first kind of ordinance is our charter. You can think of the city charter as our constitution. All of our other powers flow from the powers that are granted to us either through the charter or state law. Then we also have what we call an administrative code. Our administrative code is the code that the city uses to govern itself. It describes our own internal processes and procedures. Finally, we have a legislative code, which is the code that regulates the rest of the city, what people are allowed to do and what people are not allowed to do. So getting to the slide, actually, what would the charter change do? The charter would allow the city to use administrative citations for ordinance violations. Currently, the only uniform penalty we have for ordinance violations is a criminal citation, which has to go to criminal court, has to go to district court, and if you are convicted, you have a criminal record. Secondly, separately, in order to make this happen, we would need to separately amend each ordinance that the city intends to enforce by administrative citation. So the charter change language itself that's being proposed by us to the city council is that each ordinance that's going to be enforced using administrative citation would be amended. Each of these ordinances then would require a public hearing. Each ordinance that the administrative citation will be used for will outline the hearing procedures. So what rights do I have if I've been issued an administrative citation? The fine schedule, what is the fine going to be? And any other administrative penalties, which I don't think there are, other than I did misspeak. Restitution is a possibility in earned sick and safe and minimum wage. The charter change would not allow administrative fines simply for failure to pay a fine or a fee. So this is not a collection method. Next slide, please. Next, thank you. So the process of doing this, there's a couple different dance steps to get this underway. First, we need to amend the charter. So the city needs the authority to issue administrative citations. We would ask, the way that that would work is the city council would pass a resolution asking the charter commission to recommend a charter change. The charter commission is required by law to hold a public hearing. If the charter commission recommends that change, then the charter amendment goes back before the city council, and the council must adopt that by a vote of 7-0 in order for that change to go into effect. If the charter commission does not recommend a change, the council can still submit that change to the voters. Assuming that the charter amendment passes, that's what we're here for. The next thing in the process would be to create a procedures chapter in our administrative code. Like I said, the administrative code is the part of our ordinances that we use to govern the city actions. And we would propose an amendment to the administrative code that we've given some thought about. I'll talk about that in a minute. But there would be a public hearing on what those proposed procedures are, and that ordinance would need to be adopted by the council by a vote of at least 4-3. Once the procedures are adopted, we will then go into the legislative code to start amending individual ordinances before we start using administrative fine. Again, each of those ordinances will outline specific hearing requirements. They will most likely refer back to that administrative code section we have hopefully adopted, and they would, if there's any amendments to that procedure, those would be in the ordinance as well. So that would all be well known before the ordinance was adopted, and each ordinance will adopt its own fine schedule. So what are the penalties going to be? The council, like every other ordinance, would hold a public hearing on that change, and it would need to be adopted by a vote of 4-3, at least 4-3. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we have talked about what this administrative enforcement process would look like, what that administrative code change would be. And the first step in all of it is a warning letter or some sort of engagement. We aren't intending to surprise anyone with a citation in the mail that issues a fine. If there's evidence that the ordinance has been violated, the city staff will work directly with my office, with an assistant city attorney assigned to the department, and issue a warning letter to what we're calling a respondent. And if the respondent doesn't comply with that warning letter, or doesn't comply with earlier engagement. I believe HERO has a different engagement process. They engage in a lot of negotiation and settlement discussions. That would be their form of a warning letter. But if the respondent doesn't comply, then an administrative citation would be written. All administrative citations will tell you what the facts are. What are the facts? What did the respondent do that violated the ordinance? And would also tell the respondent what the proposed fine is, and if there's any other penalties, that will be in there as well. The citation, with the citation will come some information about the administrative options that the respondent has. The respondent can simply pay the fine and accept the penalties and be done with it. Secondly, admit that the violation occurred, but say this penalty doesn't feel fair, I don't think this is right, then they could request to address the council about a different penalty. And finally, in all due process procedures, the respondent is entitled to a hearing before a neutral decision maker. And that would be the third option, make the city prove its case. Next slide, please. So we tried to draw a map of what this looks like, and I think this is helpful. If it goes from left to right, and then the end of it is the green square in the middle. So like I said earlier, the first step in the administrative citation process is a warning letter or some sort of discussion. If there's no compliance, then a citation is issued. At that point, the respondent has the three options we talked about. If they choose to simply pay the fine, which is the middle option, we're done, the decision is final. If they choose to do the top option, which is ask for another penalty, then that gets forwarded to the city council for a hearing where the council hears what the respondent has to say. And it can go from there. Either the respondent can accept that penalty, or they can argue, nope, that's still not fair, and go to the Court of Appeals and go through the appellate process before the decision becomes final. The final option for someone after a citation is to make the city prove our case and ask for a hearing. The hearing would be before a neutral decision maker. We actually are thinking there will likely be two different kinds of decision makers. One would be an administrative law judge to the State Office of Administrative Hearings. That is a little more formal process and will be used for citations that are more complicated and involve maybe a more robust discovery. And again, the ordinance that outlines what the administrative fine will outline which cases will go to an administrative law judge. The other cases will go to what we're calling an administrative hearing officer. We expect that will be very similar to our legislative hearing officer. It could be an attorney hired by the city on a contract basis, but it'll be someone to hear both sides of the case. What does the city think happened? What does the respondent think happened? And then make a decision. Following that decision, the respondent has the right to a hearing before the city council. In most cases, it will go to a hearing before the city council. The only case that it wouldn't go to a hearing before the city council is if the respondent decided at that point to then pay the fine. Everything else will go to a hearing before the city council, where the respondent again can make their arguments to the council about why the underlying decision was right, and the city can argue why they believe that the violation occurred. Again, after the decision of the council, the respondent can either choose to have the decision be final or go through the appellate process. I think I'm done with my slides, and I think we go back to Noel.
Took me a minute to get off of mute there. Sorry, everyone. So now we'll go through some frequently asked questions that have come in over the past few weeks. After that, we'll open it up just for any general questions that may not have been answered as part of reviewing the frequently asked questions. And so the first question is, why is St. Paul implementing administrative citations? We've talked about this a little bit, but Ricardo, did you want to touch on that again a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, just to reiterate, the goal of administrative enforcement tool is really in compliance in a timely manner, then consistency throughout the process, and then the appropriate enforcement, and then the elimination of unintended consequences. So again, as I stated earlier, is that we have some ordinances right now that the only real means for us to gain compliance is criminal citations. And we want to diminish the number of criminal cases we bring forward. And then secondly, create a system that the city has a little more control over regards to the timing and maintaining the importance of the ordinances. And then lastly is, when we talk about equity, there's equity in the enforcement process. There's also equity in not doing enforcement. So creating a tool that is effective and will be used in order for us to ensure that everybody bound by these regulations is also being held to a standard that the city's put forward.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what does the use of administrative citations mean, and how does it differ from existing enforcement practices? And I think that might be one for Rachel.
Thanks, Noel. I kind of addressed this a little bit. Our current enforcement practices are by and large criminal citation, but criminal citation is just a bad fit for a lot of our offenses, and some of them we end up just sending letters and trying to get compliance the old-fashioned way. It's not a very efficient use of time. And so, but the big difference between a criminal citation and administrative citation is that administrative citation doesn't create a criminal record. There's no jail time, there's no probation. There's none of those tails that come along with a criminal conviction.
Thank you, Rachel. And then I think that kind of covers question 3 as well. So if you could speak a little bit to question 4, just in terms of what does the addition of administrative citations mean for the city's sort of enforcement approaches.
Again, I think the hope is that this administrative citation process ends up getting quicker compliance through the criminal prosecution process, particularly now during or in the middle of COVID. The criminal calendars are extremely full, and so the administrative citation will be a much quicker way to a conversation, and hopefully much quicker way to a penalty. Depending on what kind of a violation it is, I expect that the fines will be consistent, that enforcement will be consistent, because we will be able to, all of the tools will be at our hands. All of these will still be reviewed by someone in the city attorney's office before anything goes out. We will be able to have a quicker route to a hearing for people and a quicker route to a resolution.
Great, thank you. So we've received some questions in the past around enforcement. And I know, Rachel, again, not to keep you in the hot seat, but you had kind of covered some of the details about how enforcement would work. Anything you want to recap or underscore as part of that?
I guess the only thing that I would underscore is that each ordinance, we'll take a hard look at each ordinance. Part of the challenge when we started really talking about what this program would look like, part of the challenge was that our ordinances are very different. On the one hand, you have someone who didn't call to have a plumbing re-inspected. On the other, you have a business who has failed to pay their employees the proper minimum wage. The same, and we're trying to get the same fit for both of those offenses. So I think that the enforcement will look as similar as it possibly can, but in ways that make sense, it will be different. What will be similar is every case will be reviewed by a department. Every case will go through the city attorney's office, and everyone who is accused of one of these will have a right to a hearing, to notice of what they've done, and a hearing at the end of it. So that's how they'll be enforced.
Great. And then one more for you, I think, before the next one will go to Ricardo. We've received some questions about just availability of data on current or past enforcements. Can you speak a little bit to what data, and maybe Ricardo, this is one for you to sort of tag team on. But what
yeah,
sort
I think Ricardo has the numbers. I do not have the numbers.
Thanks, Noel. Thanks, Rachel. So, the area that we've looked at most closely is where we've used criminal citations, and both that division within DSI is animal control. And so over the last 5 years, those numbers range anywhere from about 110 criminal citations in that 1 year to almost 200. I think it's 195 in one of the higher years. And so that is one of the areas we really want to look at reducing that type of enforcement action against individuals. As Rachel has said, and I have said, it's not the right tool for gaining compliance. It's a bit overbearing and it has a lot of tails. The other area that we have a substantial amount of data would be around our business licensing. But at this time, that is not an area that is high priority for DSI. We have a system in our business licensing that works relatively well, works on a matrix system. It is civil. As a result of one, in addition to fines, has the ability to either suspend or revoke license. And so that's a system that seems to be working well. And so we haven't done a lot of data collection in regards to that area. The one area that I would speak to, though, as well, is there's areas in a variety of our divisions where we don't issue enforcement actions. And so we don't have the right tool to do that, an effective tool. And so for that, we don't have any numbers at all. So those are violations that might go on for a period of time, and there may be efforts through communications, dialogue, but there isn't a tool to kind of cinch the deal and make sure that we gain that compliance. So we don't have too much data in that area.
Great, thank you. So the next question is around what other violations would administrative citations potentially apply to. I know we received questions about whether this would be a tool, for instance, for Skyway code enforcement, and there may be other areas that community members may be interested in seeing this applied as a tool. Can you speak to that, Ricardo?
Yeah, thanks, Noel. And just like I mentioned about business licensing, the Department of Safety and Inspections and other city departments have a variety of tools that we may have at our disposal. When we look at the work we do around our nuisance conditions in the city, we have a system which also is fairly effective and is about the right size. And so therefore, that hasn't come very high in our priority to use administrative citations, at least not initially. I think in the future, and I mean future in 5 years, we may have a system that is more comprehensive, which would really provide that whole level of consistency, timeliness, and the same equal results. But right now we have worked in all of our departments to kind of list those violations that would be kind of the most value at this time moving forward. Certainly we could consider other violations. Skyway is one of the ones that was on our list. It did make like the top cut, but certainly as we go forward, there'll be ample time for us to discuss that and perhaps other violations that would be a good fit for this tool. Again, it's just a matter of working through each of the processes, public hearings, ordinance amendments, to allow for the use of this tool in those areas.
And that dovetails into the next question here around the process for adding violations. I think that's something perhaps, Rachel, you can speak to. Again, I know we sort of covered this from a process standpoint, but anything you'd like to highlight or underscore?
I guess at every stage there's a public hearing. Before the Charter Commission will vote, they will hold a public hearing. When they refer back to the council, before the council votes and they need to pass it by 7-0, they will have a public hearing. When the procedures ordinance is being considered, there will be a public hearing. And any individual ordinance that will use administrative fines will also have a public hearing. So there's lots of time for, this is just the beginning of the process where we are right now. The process to get this up and running is going to involve a whole lot of opportunities for people to see what's going on and express their opinion.
Thanks, Rachel. And I'll add that our goal here to kind of start the conversation and the engagement early. One is just to be clear about the process in the spaces to engage in the process. Two, to provide that background information on the rationale for why the city's pursuing this and how the city contemplates using it and foresees using it, just so that we can have that conversation with interested community members even ahead of those major sort of milestones and public hearing points. So the last few questions here, what authority and what role does the Charter Commission have? Rachel, I'll let you speak to that one.
The Charter Commission is actually a creature of state law. It is not technically a city body. The members are chosen by the district court. They're not chosen by the council or by the mayor. And their authority is to recommend changes to the charter. And those recommendations can either be sent to the city council or the Charter Commission can put something on the ballot for the citizens to vote on.
Great. And then the next question is around timeline for adopting administrative citations. We'll go into a little bit more detail after we go through the rest of the Q&A. But generally, we're going to spend the rest of 2021 going through the charter change process, as well as developing ordinance changes that would allow for the implementation of administrative citations. Once the charter change would be in place. And so we wouldn't look at actually enforcing administrative citations or using them as an enforcement tool, probably until sometime the first quarter of 2022 at the earliest. So again, a lot of steps in the process and a lot of time between here and when this would potentially be in place as a tool. And then when will the charter language be shared with the community? So we are going to be reporting back to the city council here in April, I believe April 21st, and we'll share the charter language at that time with the council, since it would be the council that would be asking the Charter Commission to provide a recommendation as to the proposed charter language. So the language has been finalized, but we want to make sure that we're having a conversation broadly before sort of sharing the final language. And again, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for engagement around that. And so now I'll open it up for questions from the audience. If you can, use the raise hand function. So you'll notice that there's a smiley face with a hand. And if you float over that, you should be able to click a raise hand button that looks like the palm of a hand. And so I'll go to Pang.
Hi, I'm wondering if Hero could probably explain what kind of fines would someone like, for instance, an employer that violates like minimum wage, what kind of fines would they be looking at? Because I'm worried that an employer who has already been hit hard with COVID and destruction from the riots now. So I'm thinking they would have to go back and pay the wages that they were owed to the employee. And then they would be hit with a citation fee on top of that. I mean, I'm just trying to understand the process of it and what kind of fees you were thinking of adopting.
So thank you for your question. And while I understand your concern and while I understand why you're asking it, at this point in the process, we're not at a point where we can say exactly how much the fees attached to it will be, just because we are still working through it and we're still kind of at the beginning, if you will. And like Noel was saying, there are still a lot of steps to go through. So we will eventually get to the point where we have that information nailed down, but unfortunately, we're just not there right now.
And I'll note too that one piece of feedback that we've received is just the question around equity as it relates to business size. So that's certainly something, in what a fee looks like or a fine looks like in consideration of business size. So that and other equity factors are certainly things that we'll take into account as fine structure is being developed. And again, there'll be opportunity to specifically engage around those ordinance change proposals as they come forward. And I see that there's a question in the chat. Would criminal penalties be deleted in some or all code sections? Rachel, maybe you can speak to some of that, and then if any of the department representatives want to speak to that as well.
Sure. I don't think there is an intention to prohibit the city from using criminal citations. That would remain an option, probably for the fraction of individuals where administrative citations simply don't work and we aren't able to gain compliance through administrative citations.
Great, thank you. There's another question from Lauren in the chat. Are we looking to change definitions of animal cruelty that these administrative citations would affect? And so maybe Ricardo, you might be able to speak to that.
Yeah, thanks, Noel. Thanks for the question. At this point, that isn't part of the scope of this project. I should say that in relation to the last two questions and this question, whenever we have a violation, there is a assessing of what tool is the appropriate tool. And to the Rachel's point that we would determine if a criminal citation would be a tool in which we would want to consider. And again, based on the severity of the violation. Some violations are much more severe and have much larger impacts to individuals and or community. The frequency in which we're kind of engaging on this behavior or activity, the nature of what the violation was. When I think of animal cruelty, there's kind of a wide spectrum of cases that could fall within that definition. And then the intent, or what's the motive, or what were the factors around why this violation occurred. So at this point, the simple answer is any definitions would be a project aside the administrative citation, of which I know that in talking with our manager of our animal care and control, that's something that they're interested in looking at outside of this project.
Great, thank you. Grace, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So could we just go back to the question about the city minimum wage? When the answer was given that how much the fines will be, and the answer was that we're not there right now. When I look at section 224.07 about the city minimum wage, this enforcement language is already in the ordinance, and levels of the fine is already specified. So how does that fit with the process?
Because as we've been saying, we're trying to make the process more uniform. And so that would move beyond just the minimum wage that you're talking about right now. So that's why I'm saying, with respect to saying exactly how much of a fine would be imposed on a business right now, I'm not in the position to answer that question, unfortunately.
Well, yes, I appreciate that. And as I am looking right at section 224.07, it says for the first violation, it would be $500. And for the second and subsequent violations, it will be $1,000. So I guess I'm just trying to understand amounts of the fines are already in ordinance, and these have been passed.
Right, understood. They have been passed, and like I was saying earlier during my comments, and unfortunately right now it's just a patchwork. We need to make it work better. So through this process, the ordinance will end up being changed. So just because the ordinance says what it says right now, we don't know if in the end result it will still say the exact same language. We're still working through that with this change.
So all three ordinances that I know of that have this enforcement language will be brought back into the process, and there'll be a public hearing for each of those?
That is my understanding of how we're looking to proceed, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. Anne, I see your hand up. You may want, if you still have your mute on.
I do. Sorry. Yes, I had I had a question about the animal control again. It sounds like you are working with animal care and control in St. Paul. Your team had mentioned that there was an increase in criminal citations, I believe, from 110 to 200. I was wondering if your research showed examples. Was it mainly the licensing of animals, dog at large, dog bites, or what were the examples for the increase?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. So there was, first I should say that it wasn't a direct increase. So let me clarify that over the last 5 years, we've seen a variety of numbers for criminal citations. Furthest back was 147 for that year, would have been in 2016. Then the following year was 136. 18 was 110, 19 was 194, and then last year was 162. And so those criminal violations are for a variety, and they're different every year. So the number of violations for the reasons that I'll list vary year to year, obviously based on what we're experiencing. So there's an attack by an animal, barking, declared animal violation, a dog at large, a dog left in a vehicle, failure to license, failure to permit, failure to quarantine, failure to remove waste, failure to vaccinate, and improper tie down, and then keeping a prohibited animal. So there's a variety of different violations that were covered by the criminal citation. And again, they vary year to year. And in 2019 was the highest number of criminal cites we've seen.
Okay, may I ask a follow-up?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. And I'm assuming, and you had indicated you'll be talking more with animal care and control, that most of those don't deal with animal cruelty. And I'm assuming that they'll still do evidence collection. If they do see cruelty, it will relate to the state statutes. And so they could still collect the evidence and file under state statutes if they see something related to that. So the continued training, if it's to city police officers or animal care and control, they will understand that anything cruelty can still be collected for state statutes, correct?
Correct. And just to clarify kind of how a case is put together and move forward, the police may gather evidence in a case. Typically, it's going to be driven by one of the agents or our manager for animal care and control, but under the coordination of our city attorney. So the city attorney will bring that action forward with all the evidence, and again, put together typically by animal care and control.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the last question will go to Matt Freeman, since we're just over time here, and then we'll kind of review next steps here. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Noel. I had kind of two questions. One was, I know this came before the Charter Commission in 2019 and passed out to the City Council. I'm wondering if there's a change in the status of where the council is at on the bill since 2019 that you could share with us. And then the other question was, I know that one of the concerns brought in public testimony in 2019 was criminalizing poverty and the impact of additional fines on individuals who would be challenged to pay them and those compounding, and wondering if folks could kind of respond to that as a concern.
Yeah, I can answer the first question. The Charter Commission did previously review language at the request of the City Council, and the item was withdrawn before a final council vote. Some of the feedback that we had heard broadly was the desire to see more sort of information around how the city would contemplate using administrative citations, and then two, around having some additional opportunities for community engagement and discussion around administrative citations. And so that's the process that we're in now, is to have this conversation early and often through the steps in the process about broadly the power to implement administrative citations, and then of course, as laid out in the ordinance process, any specific ordinance changes that would implement those. And so what you'll see in the charter language is, I think, clarity and an underscoring of the fact that there needs to be clear and concrete process around the implementation of administrative citations around any particular aspect of ordinance or city code. And then for the second question, remind us what your second question was, Matt, and we'll get that answered for you here.
Yeah, we'd heard concerns in 2019 about criminalizing poverty and then cascading fines or those escalating, and concerns about the ability for that to perpetuate economic and racial inequality.
Yep. So I think broadly, you're bringing up a point that, we heard when this was previously in the policy process, and we've heard from others as part of these discussions, the concern that we're equitable in the way that we're crafting administrative citations as a tool, and that it's something that is structured and enforced in a way that doesn't run counter to the city's equity goals and economic justice goals. So that's something that we're certainly taking to heart as we think about what the actual ordinance changes would look like. And then as Rachel's laid out, the city will not, under the process and the policy that's being proposed, be able to issue fines as a result of not paying fines. And so I think the concern that you're speaking to is how fines can sometimes escalate into either compounding fines or into more serious action, like if you don't pay a parking ticket and suddenly your license gets revoked later on in the process. So as we've kind of laid out, the goal here is really just compliance with ordinance and city code. And so, as Rachel laid out, there would be a warning letter as sort of that first step, and that would be required as part of process. And then the actual sort of issuance of the fine, and then even an appeals process around that. So, the hope is to ensure that, there's multiple sort of off ramps that can allow for compliance without necessarily using a penalty if it's not needed, because the party's willing to comply. Anything that anyone wants to add to that answer, since I'm the generalist in the room? Great. Okay, so let's talk next steps. So right now, this is all about incorporating suggestions from all of you, our community members. We're going to provide an update to the City Council on April 21st at one of their administrative meetings. So that would be a 10 a.m. meeting. And we'll report on a lot of the questions that we've received through these conversations and through email. And discuss the proposed charter language. So once the council takes action on asking the Charter Commission to take this up, we anticipate that the Charter Commission would take this up in the May or June timeframe. There would be additional council process after the Charter Commission and the council have subsequently acted on the proposed charter language. So that puts us on, again, sort of a timetable where January 2022 at the very, very earliest is when you would see any sort of implementation around a specific administrative citation. So again, there'll be lots of opportunities to engage in discussion and in the process. We're also going to be putting up a project page where we'll include this presentation, as well as a lot of the questions that we've received and the answers to those questions. And we'll make sure to blast that out to all of you and other folks who have participated in this process, just to keep the conversation going as we continue to go through the process. And so again, want to thank you for spending your evening with us to dig into this very important topic. If there are questions that come up after this, please feel free to shoot us an email. I'll drop some email addresses in the chat here, but I hope you have a wonderful night and hope to talk to all of you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good evening.